Hi, I'm Arthur, and this is part 5 in a 20-part series I am doing covering the different Primarchs in Order of the Legions. Do you need to have seen the other parts to understand this one? No, but it would make me happy. I was nervous about doing this one. With each Primarch, you discover relatively quickly that they are all exemplars of humanity. They represent the best and worst traits of all human beings that we have to offer. Dorn is the fierce adherence to laws and codes. Kurz is the unbridled lunacy of an unchecked id. Fulgrim is the love of life and how it can be intoxicating. But I'm a big enough man to admit when I just had no idea how to discuss Leman Russ, other than pointing out the basics that you would know about him. Or at least I didn't. Leman Russ and the Space Wolves are the most unappealing chapter Space Marines on offer in my opinion. And I don't say that as I don't like them or even dislike them, because there are chapters that I like less than them. There's just nothing about them that triggers any neurons in my brain to fire. I just look at them and their aesthetic is nice, but it's definitely not geared towards something that I would like. Call me a bit of a little whiny bitch, but I just don't really care about Viking aesthetic. I know that's a bit of a hypocritical statement considering I love the Votan, but I don't know. I just don't like the way that the Space Wolves do it most of the times. So to continue on that train of thought, for those who don't know, I tend to read in advance of a few months before I tackle a topic, or at least I try to. I try to at least not even talk about a topic until I'm at least a few months or a few weeks away from the subject material of a specific piece of media so that I can have time to formulate my ideas. I tend to stick to how I feel about things rather than regurgitate what other people on lore to Reddit, so on and so forth like to say. And that gets me into trouble, and that also is kind of the reason why I like to think people stick around. I had been reading books of the Space Wolves predominantly for a while, but my perspective hadn't changed on them for just as long. My opinions of them was the same as in the Space Wolf video, and my opinions of Leman Russ was about the same as well. But that all changed when I read 2 books. The first one was The Parting of the Ways. I should say it's not really a book, it's an audio drama that follows the life of Bjorn the Fell-Handed as he's recalling him being turned into a dreadnought, and then the Leman Russ Primarch book. These actually put me into a weird headspace, and due to some personal stuff that I've been going through, it started to slowly slide into place how I felt about Leman Russ and how I could relate to him like I had with other Primarchs, and how I can convey the emotions of Leman Russ to all of you so that I can add something to the conversation. The Primarchs of Warhammer 40k are such interesting and nuanced characters that I feel going at them from the same angle over and over again is not going to move the needle at all. And hell, I might be tooting my own horn a little bit too much when I think that just me waxing poetic about some weird wolf man for about 20 minutes of your time is going to do that as well. But I want to be able to add something to the conversation. I want to be able to give you guys a perspective on this character that maybe people haven't discussed as much in the past. Maybe they have, and I'm just uninformed, but we'll see. Before I get into that, I'm going to try and explain him in a way that is understandable to newcomers and old heads alike so that we have a bit of a jumping off point, okay? So starting off, who exactly is Leman Russ? Leman of the Russ is technically his full name, is a Primarch, the 6th to be specific, who was sent to the planet of Fenris at a young age. Because of this, he adopted the culture of the planet in a very weird way. He was legit raised by Fenrisian wolves and had 2 brothers who were actually wolves that accompanied him into combat pretty far into his adult life, as Fenrisian wolves are particularly long-lived. The difficult life of existing on Fenris is, well, hard to describe, as it's every single apocalypse and doomsday film you've ever seen happening all at once and just shifting the flavor of what color the sky is depending on the time of year. The summers, volcano eruptions and tectonic shifts as well as earthquakes, as well as gigantic predators. The winters, harsh tundras, storms that could freeze you to death, and also still gigantic predators. Did I mention that there's also fucking bears the size of tanks on this planet? You know, the worst kind of stuff. The culture of Fenris is very feral and very tribalistic. Imagine how a lot of people see Vikings of olden times, where they are a bunch of savages living in small huts and trying their best to survive. Leman took to this style of living well, and even found what he would consider the closest friends he has ever made alongside his wolf brothers. As Primarchs go, he rallied entire nations under his banner, or at least what little banner there was to have on that death ball of ice and fire. They all reached adulthood together, which I think is a significant part of Leman Russ's life. And because of this, when the Emperor showed up and engaged in what is likely to be considered the most high-test activities ever in 40k history, he eventually added Leman to the Imperium and gave him a legion of Space Marines, as well as the scientific ability to add the Canis Helix to the gene seed organs of his legion. Not much is known about the Canis Helix. I mean, the name implies that it's the wolf Canis gene helix of some sort. It's probably there to allow non-Fenrisian space wolves to feel the berserkerness of the Legion without having to go to Fenris. Logistically, it's a reference to the berserkers of the olden days. Now, I'm not going to be a historian here because I'm not. I'm an idiot, actually, who knows little to anything about history, but I played a lot of D&D, and I've learned where the history of my Barbarian Rage class feature comes from, where Norse barbarians, or at least allegedly barbarians, would take a shitload of psychedelics and then go nuts in the woods for a little bit and pretend to speak with Odin or some shit. You know, killing frenzy and whatnot. And yes, if I've gotten everything I just said 100% wrong, you have complete free reign to just make fun of me. But that's where the reference comes from. That's why the Canis Helix is there. It's also adding a bit of lycanthropy into the mix so that it's, you know, particularly wolfy. But I'm getting off track here. I'll probably talk more about the competitions that Leman and the Emperor went through some other time because they don't matter too much right now, but it was really cool. Basically, it was a drinking and eating and a fighting competition, and Leman won 2 of those, which is kind of crazy to think about. So, once he was brought into the Legion, something interesting happened. See, his shield bearers, the individuals who fought with him, were adults, like I mentioned. Like, full-on outside of the range of what a Space Marine should be in order to be accepted into the surgeries to become a full-blown Astartes, but they refused to not fight alongside their leader and even refused to take the half measure becoming a half Astartes like Corferon or Luther from the Dark Angels. They went through the whole implantation process and a lot of them actually survived, which is insane to think about. So you had a bunch of the wisest non-child soldier Space Marines to have ever existed, and they were in the Space Wolves of all places. These individuals were part of the 13th company of his legion, which was alleged to be his favorite company, as that was the one he would fight alongside the most. So they would fight, they would feel proud, and then the years would do as they do and grind down the hard edges of the enjoyment they would feel at war. I mentioned this before with the Jagatai video, but you have this moment where he had to come to terms with losing one of his best friends to an orc in combat, which was another individual he grew up with on Chagoris, and he had to make peace with slowly losing all those that he cared about. Leman Russ is that exact idea amplified to a degree that I did not see coming. See, Leman isn't just worried about losing his friends. He's worried about losing everything. See, the tradition of information passing down the lines on Fenris is not one of written paper and books. It is actually of skalds, storytellers, and oral history. Stories passed down at campfires through the years, and there is always going to be this issue that comes with this kind of storytelling where there's a degree of degeneration every time this happens. Even with Space Marines that have an enhanced ability to recall facts and ideas, there's always going to be small elements of the story changed every time the story is told and every time the story is retold. The stories that were being told by the newer inductees were in fact beginning to change. They were becoming a mottled and different version of what the actual truth was. It didn't bother Leman at first because, you know, don't let the truth get in the way of a good yarn. Leman actually enjoyed the deification, this idea of him being raised to the status of some mythical godlike figure to inspire those around him. It didn't bother Leman at first, I should say, but as his brothers of the 13th Company started to die and got replaced, there was this bitter melancholy that stuck to his bones like a fevered chill. The loss of not just people he cared about, but the legacy that they represented, he didn't fully want to be revered anymore as this mythical figure as this started to set in. He wanted the legacy of his legion to simply be that they were the best warriors the Imperium had to offer. He wanted there to be legends, but considering that his deeds were on par with his brothers and nothing more than that, it slowly started to set in that the soul of his legion was decaying into a pantomime of what it once was. People bragging about killing orc war bosses when every other legion was basically doing the exact same. There's nothing more telling of this than this scene after the Siege of Terra, after the Scouring, and after everything. Leman, in one of the novels, was found alone during a night of festival on Fenris. He was in a cavernous spot alone, draped in robes, drinking alone, in a state of mourning. See, tonight was the biggest celebration they had in a while, as it was the first time that new Marines had been raised ever since the Scouring happened, meaning that the Space Wolves were no longer a legion, they were a chapter of Space Marines. So the first Marines who had never seen the Legion were being raised, and Leman could not be sadder about this. He was in such a dour mood when one of these fresh Space Wolves, like the newest one that literally had just been raised today, encountered him by chance as they went off into the woods and found this cave that he just happened to be in, and they found him mourning the loss of one of the last people he cared about. He had ashes pasted onto his face in this kind of death mask, and his movements were haggard, being described as unlike a Primarch and more like a haggard old man. He saw this young wolf and smiled, realizing who it was. Someone who never saw the Legion and never will. He then regaled this new wolf the tales of long-lost glory and why he grieved. All of his men at this point were for the most part either dead, dying, or so old that it didn't even matter. Only a handful of them remained, and it was on this day, after all of these years, that he had finally received the news that the lion, his brother, had died. See, back then we actually thought that, so pay no mind to the fact that the lion pulled a dying in pretend and came back like it wasn't one of the biggest shakeups in the setting. But do keep a pin in this, because we're going to talk about this later. But yeah, he confessed stories of him fighting with his brother, stories that seem harrowing and filled with murder, but to him were just the squabbling of bitter brothers competing for the affections of their father, and is a telltale sign that he missed his brother now more than anything else. He was a warrior who was tasked with winning wars, and he did it. Every time, without distinction, to the point where it got boring for him. His life's meaning began to lose its fun. Now other Primarchs can be satisfied with the idea of the future and getting it done, but Russ lives in the moment and he desires to be satisfied. But in this moment, there's grief. For what he did to his brother Magnus, for the loss of the lion, and for him not being there to help with the Siege of Terra. This year has been unkind to me. I know this is coming out of nowhere, but the further I get into this series, the more I feel a level of some kind of therapeutic release with learning about these characters as in-depth as I am. And I don't care if it's cringe to relate to some 10-foot tall, muscle-bound Viking Hulk, but I do. There is this idea I'm currently battling with. I'm not naturally a depressed person. I'm usually very positive, and I'm pretty much always pretty optimistic. But suffice to say, as I mentioned, it's been a rough year for me, and I won't go into detail because that's my personal information, but this idea that I have been struggling with is that as I grow older, every year that goes by, and every season that passes, I've noticed that the things that have made me happy in the past don't make me as happy as they once did. And it's this year that I've noticed that it's at its worst, where I have to try new things in order to get any kind of excitement, any kind of enjoyment out of my surroundings. I surround myself with people that I care about, and there's just this numbness that comes with it. Now, it might just be my circumstances, but I won't bore you with the details. It's not something I feel any depression about. I'm naturally a sardonic person and enjoy life, especially if it's kind of shitty. I like making jokes about the darkest aspects of living. But when I came to this realization that things I used to love more than anything else are nothing more than a numbing additive to my life to keep myself from being too distracted, it was a bit of a bitter pill to swallow. I change up my life and I try new things. I'm doing some traveling soon, which is definitely exciting. And that's what I meant earlier when something happened in my life that made me realize that I relate to Leman Russ at that point more than any of the other Primarchs. There is this fear I have. I doubt it's going to be any level of legit, and I doubt it's even that uncommon to feel this way, but as I read about Leman Russ and how he feels about being less and less interested in the wars around him and simply wishing to speak with his brother and simply wishing to feel something that isn't just fear of repercussions, I can't help but feel seen. I feel like my struggles to find meaning and something to do to keep myself positive through the torrent of bullshit I gotta put up with is really relatable when I think about this character. And I share the same fears as he does, where in the back of my mind, I worry that it's eventually just all going to go numb, where I just don't care about anything anymore. And I am worried that it will just be this gray melange of just nothing. And I don't think that is uncommon, like I said. Mental health struggles and issues therein are often unreported, and symptomology doesn't necessarily cover everything that can happen. And that's one of the reasons why I relate to these stories of fictitious men. I can see myself in them and gain a greater clarity to how I feel because there's something there. That is a human experience. And that's why I think people like Leman Russ. Sure, you can like the Viking battles, you can like the screaming barbarian who can tank shots and fight other Primarchs and win one-on-one, but he is a human being at his base. You might say, oh, but he's a Primarch, he's better. No, there's nothing more human in my eyes than a man alone on the night of a party who simply wants to remember his brother, his best friends, and the animals that he grew up with. It is super relatable. And I'm uncomfortable sharing these pieces of information, but I want to convey my point better, and that's the only way in my mind to be able to convey this, that I relate to this struggle of loss, this struggle of loss of purpose. And if you follow the end of the Leman Russ Primarch book and you go into the parting of the ways, you find that he eventually became so frustrated with his guilt, his, I guess, annoyance that he wasn't there during the Siege of Terra, that he left for the Eye of Terror, telling one of his oldest companions, one of the people that grew up with him, Bjorn the Fell-Handed, that you are not coming. And I've always thought about that. I've always thought that maybe he did this as one act of kindness to tell his last remaining brother that I don't want the stories to be overwritten. You're the oldest. You need to tell everybody what actually is happening and what actually happened. I think that's very interesting in terms of a dissection. And I think in that message, 40K has given us the answer to that question of, does it all just go away? Does it all just get numb and nothing will ever return to once it's lost? Because in the modern setting, the answer is no. The lion has returned. Gilliman has returned. What was lost can be reclaimed, and a new, greater war than ever before is being waged in the name of mankind, exactly like Leman would have wanted. I'm a naturally optimistic person, but I love that narrative through line that Leman was worried that everything goes numb at some point due to the losses, and now his losses are slowly being undone. I think it is a bit of noble, bright messaging, and I know that a lot of people probably wouldn't like that. I think it's something that can uplift us all to some degree. I'm probably just waxing poetic about absolutely nothing important, but hey, you chose to watch this video and you got this far. Shut up and enjoy. So thank you. I think Leman would be a good Primarch to come back soon, even next, even if I think that Dorn's going to be the next one to come back. Just to be proven even further wrong, because if the lion can change, so too can the wolf. So let me know what you all think about this depression-riddled nonsense in the comments. I will be looking out for whatever you got. Also, remember to like and subscribe, as it helps the channel immensely. Special thanks to my channel members, and if you want to support me as well as gain access to additional content, then become a channel member today. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, I swear, I am a happy person. I just get super melodramatic when I'm talking about big buff men.